Hey Guardians, I just want to let everyone know that I do have both a Twitch and a Twitter, and I'm very active on both. Feel free to come give me a follow on both, links in the description. Alright, y'all, gonna be doing this with minimal editing, so bear with me because there's still so much to do in this DLC. However, yesterday I did go ahead and just bust through the Legendary campaign on my Hunter. No spoilers, but I just wanted to give my first impression so far and talk a little bit about what I thought of the DLC, or at least what I've played of it so far. So the first thing I want to mention is the story. I was actually very just pleasantly surprised. Going into this, I was approaching it, with all the big changes and everything. I went into it with kind of the attitude of this is like going into a new Destiny game. It's a brand new saga with all the revamps. We're basically going into a new Destiny game. And as I think we're all aware, whenever a new Destiny game comes out, that first story is usually not that great. But I was pleasantly surprised. But I had a very good time with it. I wasn't sure at the start, but a little bit before the halfway point, things start to get very, very interesting. And the campaign is also surprisingly long for a Destiny 2 campaign. Like, what I want to say Lightfall was, 5 or 6 hours, Witch Queen was probably around the same. This one took me, I would say, if we don't include time I spent, getting distracted by various secrets throughout the map and that sort of thing, as well as time spent in the tower and whatnot, I would say this story took me probably around 7-ish hours total. And granted, that was on the Legendary campaign. On normal, I would imagine you could bust it out a lot faster, but still. And on top of that, this had a very smooth launch. Like, people I know, I wasn't able to get in right away. I had some stuff going on before I was able to play, but I know most people that I know at least were able to get in pretty much right at reset. And when I was able to jump in a few hours after reset, I didn't have a queue time or anything. So big props to Bungie for having a very smooth launch. But I would say the story really is the best part of this campaign, and the new characters with Lodi and Orin they're both very likable. They add a lot to the story. Now, I will say I wasn't the biggest fan of some of the Archon's writing. I thought some of his lines were just kind of cringe. Very, very slight spoiler, and I mean tiny spoiler. I think most people probably saw this coming, but Maya Sundaresh does make somewhat of a return, and she never really interested me in Echoes. I honestly thought she was kind of a less than thrilling villain when compared to previous bad guys in the franchise, like Oryx, right? The Witness, Savathun, so on and so forth. I just don't really care for her as a villain that much, but outside of that, it was still very solid. The Nine do also make some brief appearances, and they're actually pretty entertaining to interact with. Now, as far as the gameplay experience goes, overall, it's pretty good. Keplar is a very, very cool location. I wouldn't necessarily put it on par with the Pale Heart, at least as far as aesthetics goes, but the overall location is very good. There's a ton to do, and there's a ton of side quests after you get through the main story. Now, the Matter Spark is kind of the main thing I see people really not liking on Twitter and whatnot. I didn't mind it that much. My only real issue with it was, I don't know what it was about it, but it kind of made me motion sick a few times, which was really odd because I have literally never ever gotten motion sick from a video game. And I do think it was used maybe a little too heavily, but overall, I really didn't mind the Matter Spark that much at all. There are a few sections with it that are actually very fun. Then as far as your more typical, shooter gameplay goes, there are a lot of very fun fights and very fun arenas and some pretty interesting puzzles along the way as well. So overall, I actually had a pretty good time with the campaign. There were a few parts where I got a little bit frustrated, but that was mainly because, quite frankly, I was doing this on 4 hours of sleep. I got a later start that I wanted, and I was just tired, and, I have tons of stuff to cover in this DLC, so I was just trying to bust through it as quickly as I possibly could. But that aside, I enjoyed the campaign. I've seen some people on Twitter saying that this campaign is worse than Lightfall, and I would love to know what they're smoking because this is leagues better than Lightfall. Now, as far as the new systems go, so far they seem interesting, but it will take some time to learn. At the moment, of course, I'm mostly looking for anything that might be potent in PvP, which I would expect to be, of course, the weapon stat, the health stat, and the super stat. Those are primarily what I think I'm going to be looking to spec into. Now, of course, that is coming from someone who is a PvP main, and I am kind of expecting PvP to be borderline unplayable once people figure out what's hottest until Bungie can rein things in, which is pretty typical whenever we see big shifts in systems like, the stats and whatnot. But I will say I do still think the biggest issue, sandbox problems aside, that PvP has right now is the RNG for loot in this game really does add a huge barrier of entry to even just get into PvP with a usable loadout. So Bungie still needs to address that somehow, because that's going to be the biggest issue in trying to bring new players into PvP. And as I'm sure you're all aware of, we got kind of a variation of Flint Striker with the new artifact mod, and can we please just disable the artifact inside of PvP? Like, we really don't need an Igneous Hammer 2-tap meta going on. Because for anyone who somehow is not aware, with that artifact mod and Igneous Hammer, if you have Golden Tricorn, as long as you land 3 crits on that first kill, then you're 2-tapping afterwards. But that aside, overall first impressions so far are fairly positive. We'll see how the new raid goes. I'm not going to be bothering with day one. It just takes up way too much time. But I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoy the new area. So overall, I'm actually having a pretty good time. I went into this with expectations so low you'd need a shovel to find them. Yeah, so far it's pretty good in my opinion, at least. I'm having fun, which is actually kind of surprising to me. Now, the next thing, as a very brief side note, is, of course, you have Graviton Spike, the new exotic 150 hand cannon. Now, the quest for Graviton Spike is just basically a series of fetch quests, kind of similar to how Kvostov was inside of Final Shape, although thankfully it takes a fraction of the amount of time that the Kvostov one does. But the final step is like semi-time gated because it's linked to an activity that only pops up like every hour and a half or so inside of Kepler, and I'm really not a fan of that. Like, please, Bungie, when you drop a new exotic quest, just let me do the quest. Just let me finish it. Like, please, let me do it all in one go so that I can actually use the gun. Now, moving on to the last thing, I do have one major concern, and that is player counts were actually not that great. I think it peaked yesterday at around like 90-something thousand players, which compared to previous DLCs is bad, like really bad. Most DLCs are like, a little above or a little below like 200,000 players, so less than half of what we're used to, which is very concerning. But we are still very early into the DLC and into the new season, so hopefully we'll see those numbers go up. But that really is my main concern for the moment. What I will say though is, in my opinion, if you're thinking of picking this up, I would probably do it. I had a very good time with the story. I'm really enjoying spending time on Kepler. The new systems I think are going to be very fun inside of PvE. Of course, we don't know how it's going to affect PvP so far, but in PvE, at least, it's going to be very fun. And again, no spoilers. I'm not going to say when this appears or how, but we do get a little bit of cosmic horror inside of the new DLC story, which I actually am stoked for. That's something I've always wanted to see in Destiny. So yeah, sorry for getting a little bit rambly. I do have to kind of cut this video off here because I have a ton of other stuff to, jump on because I need to start cranking out content for the new DLC. But so far, first impressions as far as the story, the new patrol zone and all that, very, very positive. The new systems, again, we'll see what happens in PvP. In PvE, though, I think it's a very good thing. But anyway, y'all, I do have to move on. There's still a ton to cover in this DLC, so as always, don't forget to hit that like button. You can leave me your thoughts in the comments if you've already played through Edge of Fate. And of course, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button with the bell icon. Check the description for my Twitch because I'm going to be streaming a ton this week. But for now, I will see you all in the next video. Peace, Guardians.